listening to the Cars of Carlisle podcast, episode 42, the Reighard Family Car Heritage.
Cars of Carlisle is your favorite internationally downloaded podcast about all things automotive. Darren and his CFC team are ever searching for interesting automotive happenings, real stories about real car people, and fun features to inform and entertain you. Each week, the Cars of Carlisle crew brings you show topics ranging from car shows to team adventures to auto racing weekends to behind-the-scenes human interest stories from car nuts that live across town, across the country, or even across the globe. Come join the road trip.
Today, the Cars of Carlisle team heads to nearby Boiling Springs, Pennsylvania. While there at his parents' house, your host reminisces with his folks about 4 generations of Reighard automotive history. Rick and Carolyn share stories about their son's lifelong obsession about all things automotive, from Darren's massive childhood Matchbox and Hot Wheels car collection to working the crowd at car shows in the 80s and 90s. Pull up a chair to the Reighard Family kitchen table and learn more about how a 4-decade car fascination launched this international podcast. So, let's get revved up.
Hello, everyone. Do not change the dial. Yes, this is still Cars of Carlisle, but a different voice hosting this evening. This is Scott. In my travels along with Darren throughout the past year, it's been really interesting watching the discussions and interviews with guests and listeners, in that it starts out as an information gathering interview, but very quickly turns into friendly discussion and banter. And there have been several people along the way who, after the fact of listening to the podcast, have said that they would like to know more about Darren the person, and his interest in cars. Now, I know going into all of this personally that Darren's main interest was to share everything that he could about the automotive industry and anything going on with Cars of Carlisle, and to not make it about him, but more importantly, about the guests and the listeners and any information that he could convey. However, with much convincing, this episode will focus on Darren sharing random and auto-focused information about himself, as well as answering questions that I and some listeners have for him. So here we are out of Boiling Springs at Darren's parents' house. We are at the kitchen table doing a type of round table interview. Some background information on Darren and his family and the love of cars from the past. So Darren, you talked about in the opener about the 4 generations of automotive love. So do you want to start in on that and mention about where it started and how it began?
Well, I probably need to turn my dad because I never knew my great-grandfather, and that's really where that first generation, if you will, it's almost the time of the horseless carriage and the very first era of vehicles with the wooden spoked wheels and all of that. So I'll turn to my dad.
Yeah, my grandfather was born, I believe it's 1889. I recall seeing some very early photos of him. He had an Oakland touring car that he drove. And then in about 1923, he made a replica of a Roadster, probably a Model T, maybe something a little later than that. But for my father, for his 6th birthday, he made it all out of shaped the tin. It had pedals. It had outside band brakes. It was chain drive, flat chain, and I think it was a valve wheel for the steering wheel. So I still have that. It went through several members of the family, and I had it restored and have it today. Then my father was more a car collector than a restorer. He had a number of Corvairs,
Impalas.
He had a couple of Impalas. He had, in the Corvair he had a convertible. He had a sedan, and he had the van in the Corvair era. Later he had a 1940 Chevrolet 2-door sedan, I believe. So he fixed them up, but they weren't show cars by any means.
He enjoyed them.
Yeah, he enjoyed them, right.
And you still have the pedal car now?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. Yeah, it's black, in black enamel.
And Mom, your dad actually seemed like he was buying and selling a car every year or two too, right? You were always around a new car in the driveway.
Pretty much. I remember back Studebakers were the big thing. Mm-hmm. My dad always had the manual shift. That's what I learned to drive on. He loved the manual shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So
Maybe that's where you get it, Darren, because you always love the manual shifts too.
Well, and you always said about when your dad would go in to get a new car, back then the showroom would give you models of the cars, plastic models, and then what happened?
My brother and I used to wreck them. We'd have demolition derbies run into each other.
Yeah, they'd be worth a fortune today, of
Right,
course,
right.
but yeah.
Better than model cars than the real cars, though.
Yeah, they were
Can't
smashed.
smash those into each other.
Well, let's then talk about after your dad. You obviously were into cars before you probably even had your license, right?
Well, I was into a 1948 motor scooter, a Cushman motor scooter back then. Souped it up such as you could. It was my father's help. Milled the head and bored it out. So it must have had like 0.3 more horsepower than it was invented with. But yeah, so I always liked that. And first car I ever owned was a 1964 Chevy Impala, 2-door Super Sport. And it was an automatic 327 aqua blue with a white interior. It was a nice car. That was the first car I owned, and Carolyn and I were married. That's what we had.
Then it had the twin antennas, 45.
Yep, had two twin antennas on the rear. Right, it was a hard top. Yeah.
I know there's pictures of me being held on a lap in that car, kind of before the whole
Yeah.
solid seats time and all that.
Yeah, you would have been projected like a rocket out of that thing.
That's right.
Yeah, that was probably the one car I wish I had today. You know, it was a classic. And then I got into. You always had to watch this activity going on in the garage. It started with Model A Fords. Had a 1929 Roadster, which did a frame-off restoration on that. And
What was the car that I remember in the garage from 30 years ago that you had? The red. What was
That
that?
was the Impala.
that was the Impala.
Oh, okay.
We'll get into that era.
Whoops,
But this,
I jumped
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, this
I
is-
got out of the Impala era.
No
or the-
fast forwarding
Or the
stuff.
Corvair
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
That was an
So-
error.
That was an error on my part. The Corvair
That's
era.
all right.
Yeah,
That's all right.
error. Right.
So, 1929 Roadster came out of New Mexico. Originally, it was a pile of parts, and I think Carolyn's comment was, "You paid what for that?" But over the years, we did a really nice restoration on it. It had dual side mounts, rumble seat. Darren and his sister would ride to car shows in that rumble seat, usually hunkered down in with a blanket because it was cold. We lived in New York State then. Took that car to Hershey and got a first junior award first time out. So got a lot of trophies with that car.
And we always had rolls, like I would do the wheels and the detail, the white walls and
Yeah.
stuff would have her duties and roles. And,
So you were a pit crew.
Yeah.
kind of. And then,
Yeah, we had to clean it up because we never trailered it. We drove it to
Right.
wherever we went.
and then we had to learn all about the car. So at a young age, we'd be able to describe it. Yes, it's a 29, and yes, we did period correct on this.
Had to. We had to learn about it. You make it sound like prison camp. Like there wasn't an interest there to start with.
Yeah.
So we kind of became techies. We knew our family car, and we could talk to anybody at the car show, any stranger about it. We'd be proud of it.
Third vehicle we did was a 1929 Model A two-door sedan. That one got about 80% done, and we sold it. Unfortunately, that was supposed to be Carolyn's, and it never got finished. So I apologize again for that. Yeah. Then we got into the. Let's see. I guess it was the Mustang. Darren's first vehicle was a '68 Mustang.
And that was blue.
No,
Is that
no,
light
it's
blue or
actually
light green?
Seafoam green.
Seafoam green.
It's not the most manly of colors, but I kept it original. It had like deep moss was the interior color, so it was like a dark green two-tone. But it was just a standard straight six, 200 cubic inch coupe.
Yeah. So he worked on that with me, and we drove that in your junior, senior year in high school, and some after that, I think.
And
So,
into college, yeah.
yeah. So then we got into the Chevy era. That was we had a 65. We bought a 65 SS Impala convertible, and it from the original owner. And trunk was bad shape, as often happens with convertibles. Did a frame off restoration on that. A lot of new old stock parts went into that. Took the original 327 and Power Glide out and put a rebuilt Power Glide with a shift kit and a beefed up 327 back in it, and it was regal red with white interior, white top, black carpeting. Very, very sharp car. And eventually sold that. Got a '66 Impala convertible, not an SS, also red. And then let's see. After that, those were both sold, and a '66 Chevy Nova SS.
That was up in Binghamton. We had moved from that area down to Pennsylvania.
Right.
And went back up to actually look at it. And I remember when the guy opened the garage door and fired it up, you said to yourself, "Oh boy, this is very nice."
It had Corvette side pipes on it, just headers and the Corvette side pipes. It had originally been built as a street racer out on Long Island. The story went. It only had a driver's seat in it. The guy I got it from replaced the interior and did some further work on the
tucked and rolled the dash, right, and some other.
Yeah, it was tuck and roll dash. It was stripped under the hood pretty much. Battery was in the trunk, no heater. It was just a big 396 Chevy radiator in it, and an engine. That was pretty much it. No power steering, no power brakes.
They had the M22 rock crusher clutch, right? And
Yep,
spray
close
guard.
ratio, rock crusher. Well, close ratio Muncie. 410 rear, and it was a street racer ride. It was an 8th mile car, not a quarter mile car. And then after that, it was the motorcycle period for about 15, 18 years. Carolyn had a couple different bikes, and I had probably 4. And we just traveled extensively on those.
Say some of the places you've been. I mean, that's more than just going around the state.
Well, we did a trip to California and back. It was about 8,000 miles. Went to Nova Scotia. Took a ferry over to Newfoundland. Rode around Newfoundland. Been out to Key West. We both rode. I think the furthest you rode was probably Asheville, North Carolina. It was a Honda Hoot down there. Probably had about 50,000 miles of motorcycle period. So.
Did you always have Hondas? Were they all?
No, Kawasaki's and Hondas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I had Honda.
Yeah. Well, I had the last 2 bikes were Kawasaki Nomads, 1500s. They were big road bike, nice bike. And then we went wheelless for a while, except the day-to-day drivers, and now have owned for about 3 years 2000 C5 Corvette. Red again, convertible. So
that's what torch red.
Yes, torch red. Yeah,
it's a sharp car.
So that's been the automotive history on our end.
And you actually had it in the Carlisle events, Corvettes of Carlisle, the flag parade this last year.
This past year it was featured in the shot they do of all the Corvettes that make up the American flag. So then, and then Darren started his era of vehicles.
Yeah, I've bought and sold probably. I didn't have to really stop and think about it. Daily drivers and everything else, probably upwards of 18 cars.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Can you go through them? Do you remember all of them that you had in the order that you had them?
Okay, well, I had, this is off the cuff, I haven't prepared.
So you started with the Mustang.
I had a 68 Mustang, and then I went through a period of time where I thought, well, I can't get to college, and I don't want to take that on campus, so then I started to buy the junk cars just to get me going. I had some really non-glamorous vehicles like a Pontiac J2000 that Buddy and I did a 0 to 60 test in, and I remember after he said, how about now? And I said, not yet. And he was counting off 28, 29, 30, 31 seconds, and it was still struggling to get to 60 on a back road. So that was about as gutless as it comes. Couple escort station wagons as college vehicles, and they were sort of disposable vehicles. Get them for $700, drive them for half a year, and flip it and get something else.
And then you had, what was the burgundy one?
I had a Nissan Stanza that was pretty cool.
And then you had a Ford Taurus wagon, right?
Oh my word, that big green
Which was
wagon.
not that cool.
That was not cool at all, and that was in my early 20s. But to me, it was almost like a little mini SUV because I was super into mountain biking at the time. So it was a great command vehicle. I could just throw a bike in the back, and lift the tailgate and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there was a lot of non-sexy vehicles in that process, and because of that, slowly try to get back into it, and that's where, of course, the Cubers know about the 13 BRZ, and slowly getting back into doing that.
But in the midst, you also had a Saab.
I did. I had a Saab 9000 S 5-door, and that was beautiful. It was midnight blue with a camel interior. And
You had a white Honda.
I had a 5-speed Civic, which was a fun little car. So you're right. There were a couple semi-cool cars in there. Now I would love to have something newer, like I have my current, as well as maybe for me a 55 Chevy. I would love to have almost a slicked out gasser style 55 Chevy. To me, I'd pay homage to American Graffiti, the one that Harrison Ford drove. They actually make quite a few out there. People will restore them to look somewhat like that, sort of like the Eleanor craze. There are those out there that will make them look like the movie car. So that would be something of interest to me.
Okay, so when we were doing the ice hike a couple weeks ago, you were sharing a story about a car growing up that you had. So let's jump into a couple of the stories you had about the not so glamorous times with the vehicles in the past.
Well, my dad had an aunt that had a private AA frame on Canoga Lake, and we would come down from New York State and visit. And then when we moved to central Pennsylvania, we would, of course, go up towards Bloomsburg to visit.
And Canoga Lake is where?
It is near about 45 minutes north of Bloomsburg.
Okay. Red Rock, Ricketts Glen.
Yeah, Ricketts Glen, Red Rock Mountain. And I don't know, that was what, a 1984, 85-ish?
Yeah, right around there.
But I'll let my dad describe the car and what happened. I retold the story to Scott as we were doing an ice hike adventure last month, or earlier, and it was one of my favorite stories. But.
Well, it was black. It was Mercury station wagon. Had about every option on it you could get, including the requisite wood grain contact paper on the sides to emulate a Woody. But it was in the era of maximum emission controls, and it was totally gutless. It was a small V8. Floored went up that mountain about 20 miles an hour, maybe. I'm not sure we were doing 20, but it was a terrible car. Followed at some point, I got the sequence. I'm not sure of here. There was a Pinto station wagon. Also
before,
that was a powerful 4-speed. Wow,
and those were really safe too.
Oh yeah, they were. Well, the station wagons were a little safer than the cars, but it was orange with the wood grain
that was the upgrade
contact
from
paper.
the light blue. Remember we had the powder blue one.
Yes, we're in love with Pintos for some reason.
Wow,
I don't know.
and some interesting colors.
Yeah, oh yeah. And as I remember, it had no storage space, so I made a
It's
box.
a Pinto. How would it have storage?
Yeah.
It's a bubble.
Well, no,
We had the
remember, this
wagon.
was a station wagon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I made this box to keep, emergency items in and so on in the back. And as I remember it, I covered with leftover orange shag carpet, which was all the rage back then.
Was this box external or internal?
Internal.
Oh, okay.
Internal. And kids would sit on it or lie on the box. It was very safe, I'm sure.
It was like a rumble seat.
Right.
Yeah, like a rumble. Yeah.
The plywood would crumble in a collision.
And then there
So it
was
was a crumble seat.
Yeah, the crumble seat. And then there was a Fairmont wagon.
Oh, I
that
remember
was
that one.
blue. I think that was
That
maybe.
also was the ice blue.
Yeah, it was. I don't even remember what year that was. It was the 80s sometime, I think. So then there was a Ford Thunderbird. I think it was affectionately known as Blue Thunder.
Because it was blue too?
It was
It
blue.
was.
Same
Wow.
color, light blue.
It was a land yacht.
Yeah, it was
roughly 10 feet wide.
Well, the hood was approximately 1.5 times longer than the trunk lid. I mean, it was.
And you didn't like any of these cars?
Well, at the time.
We didn't brag about it.
We didn't brag. We said, farewell, Fairlane.
You had to get a second car.
Yeah, we had to have 2 cars, and that was what fit the bill at the time. But terrible handling. The thing was like driving a battleship on the road.
With a waterbed on it.
Yeah, it was
Blue
awful.
Thunder.
And what were some of the other?
Notice how lightning wasn't in its name.
No,
That's
no.
what I drove.
The what?
The station with the vans.
Oh, tell about your
Oh,
Aerostar.
yeah, you got an Aerostar story.
I went to Virginia to pick Darren up from college with a couple of his buddies, and the car was pretty loaded. And coming back up through Virginia, we came to a stoplight, and the guy behind me, he was trying to race me. So I said to Darren, watch this. And I left him in my dust. He just couldn't believe it. Because he had a sporty car, and I'm in a van with some college students.
Must have been the only overpowered Aerostar Ford ever made. I don't know. For some reason, it had a lot of guts.
It did.
It was modified in some way.
Yeah.
Later, Darren's dad said, let's find out what kind of guts this car has. And Darren and I looked at each other and said, we already know.
We've tested it.
We beat the station wagon going up Ricketts Glen.
Oh my. Yes.
Cyclists good.
Oh,
Yeah.
The good and bad of the years, I guess. So needless to say, Darren's been around wheels for a long time, including a tell about his Matchbox collection.
He had cases and
Hundreds.
cases
Hundreds.
of Matchbox
And
cars.
Hot Wheels.
Oh, and I made him a city
Yeah,
that
was
he
cool.
could drive them on and pedal on material with houses and roads.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd go to the store and he'd know what he had, and he'd go look through the racks and say, I don't have this one, or I have it in blue but I want it in green, or and
of
he
course
knew-
you had it in blue. Every car you
Yeah,
had,
yeah.
Matchbox and real was blue.
But he knew what he had.
Or red. Yeah.
Or red. Right.
Yeah, I had a mental inventory of all those.
Yeah, you played hours and
Probably
hours.
still do.
Well, I kept them all. I still have them. Yeah, they were that, and there's a lot of. You might find a picture or two to put on Instagram, but it seemed like every picture of me at the house or around the house, Christmas morning, birthday, picture opening a gift. It was either a dump truck or a wheeled something, or smoking the Bandit truck or Hot Wheels track, or
Oh, you had wasn't that a Smokey and the Bandit race
yeah, that was
set one?
yeah.
It was a tragedy there.
Yeah.
What?
I wanted
Here we
it so
go.
badly. My sister denies this ever happened. It's sort of like one of those mysterious things, a fallacy of history. But I set the thing up, and it was like one of a slot car thing. So of course, you powered it with the handheld gun pistol thing, and you would drive. It was actually a little cop car, had alternating blue and red lights on the top, and then it had a truck that was sort of like from Smokey and the Bandit. It was a 18-wheeler, and it pulled the trailer, and he would chase the truck around the track. Well, I
Was a little Burt Reynolds in it and stuff?
yeah, unfortunately.
A little Sally Field.
Yeah, little Sally Fields.
I asked for that, but that was the bolt-on that I didn't get.
It's the adult store.
I had the little Sally Field collection.
Yeah, okay.
But I had set it up. I think I might have gotten one entire circumference lap done, and my sister was excited about something, and she comes running by, and I didn't think ahead because I put the power cord across, and she caught it as she ran by and ripped the entire track off the dining room table into lots of pieces. So
And it never worked then.
it never was the same again. But yeah, I haven't let her forget about that. That was a tragic Christmas morning.
All right, so we'll ask Darren some questions later in the interview, specifically from him of what he remembers. So Rick and Carolyn, if you could just share, maybe if you have a couple of memories of when Darren was younger, before he would even remember things, if there was anything specific that related to automotives and cars and his love of it from the very beginning.
He was pretty little, and he was in his car seat, and there was a Jeep in front of us, and I said, that's a Jeep. And in no time, he was saying Jeep, and he could spell it. Jeep, and I couldn't believe it. He's going around, Jeep, he wanted a Jeep.
He's lucky a Lamborghini wasn't first. The spelling on that would have been bad.
That GH is really tough.
He would have just said Lambo instead.
You like trucks too, but truck was a harder word to say. I think it came out fruck.
Or something like that, which I would have to
Something
beep out if
Yeah.
you say what it
Did I
was.
embarrass you a couple times in the store? Yeah.
So he would say like the frackin' Jeep would be if there was a truck
Yeah.
and a Jeep thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, he did it. But it had a dirt pile that had a complete fleet of Tonka excavators, and then when it was time to quit work, he could relax. He had a Tonka Winnebago to go on vacation. So it was always wheels.
It was his little getaway world.
That Winnebago was very cool. In fact, it was large enough that I would put stuff in it and then I could ride it down the driveway. It was big. Like I would sit on it and just ride it. So it was.
And that would have beat the Woody going up Ricketts Glen too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the only other thing I would want to say is I think Darren was probably around 8 when he first started coming to Carlisle events. For when we would come down from near Binghamton, New York, with a couple of buddies of mine that were into cars, and spend a long day there and drive back the same day usually. So he was into that for many years. And then we went to Hershey several times also when we had all the Model A's. So he's very intimately aware of the growth of certainly of the Carlisle event shows.
Do you want to tell the story about when you and Mom, you had that 66 Chevy 2, entered at the War College, but you guys were called away or something?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the only time I'd have to say his car interest waned a little bit was Carolyn and I were away on traveling, and it was when I had the 66 Nova, which was a nice looking car, black, blue interior. There's the blue again.
It's the blue.
Yeah, there's
Marina blue this time.
Can't get away from it.
And I described that car earlier. But anyway, in Carlisle is the Army War College, and every year they would have around the same time the Carlisle events, not concurrent, but they would have a car show, big car show at the parade field there. There were bleachers. And there were classes for each of the cars. And so I said, Darren, do you want to take the Nova over? So he said, sure. So he drove it over. And it was a warm summer day. And he was in the shade in the bleachers. And what happens with the car show is there's one overall car that the commandant of the War College picks as the one car he or she would like to have of all the cars there. So they're announcing from the stand with the owner of the 66 Black Nova, please come down in the award line. And of course Darren's sleeping. So
I took a small nap.
Yeah,
a large nap.
I think they were about ready to give up when somebody nudged you.
Yeah, somebody just by power of deduction realized this might be the owner.
Yeah, isn't that your vehicle down there? They're trying to get somebody to give an award. So I guess he finally got it over and received the commandant.
Yeah,
so,
as I was I had to take the trophy and shake the commandant's hand.
That was dedication.
Yeah. I think he slipped off the car wagon a little bit right
just
there.
a little bit.
That was just must have been a long work week, and I was catching a few winks.
You know, I'm going to jump into one thing. I'm just realizing the theme here with this is that because that wasn't his car. Because I've joked with him forever, for the last 30 years, he'll do anything in anyone else's car that he would not do in his own car.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree.
Oh, yeah. Hey, let's go down this muddy lane. Let's go down this pothole road. Let's jump this gorge.
Yeah.
But not in his car.
Let me park my car first, and we'll take yours.
Right.
Yeah,
and let me drive and do things that I wouldn't do in my own car. All right, getting right into it. Question number 1. What is one of your very first memories of Cars or Automotive?
I would have to say that one of my very first memories was I was just barely 4 years old, and I do vividly remember coming home from Montrose, Pennsylvania, and my sister was being brought home from the hospital. And I remember we were in the light blue Pinto wagon, and I remember looking over the seat and being so proud of her and that type of thing. But that was just one of my very first memories in general. I do also remember
Was that the rumble seat, or what she referred to as the rooster seat?
Yeah, no. much later. But I do remember my dad's dad, my grandpa Bud. I was probably 2.5 or 3. That might have been definitely would have been an earlier memory. And he would grab me by the back of my shirt and pick me up like a bear cub kind of thing and swing me around in his teeth. And I thought that was hilarious. But there are pictures of me playing with plastic cars, and he would come up behind me and do that kind of thing. And I do remember being frustrated as a toddler, like, I just want to play with this car, and you keep picking me up and swinging me around. So that would probably be one of my very first. But it was always a car in my hand, a Tonka truck, a plastic 18-wheeler, something. But if it had wheels, I had it with me at all times.
Okay, so kind of piggybacking off of that question, what is one of your best childhood memories of cars?
One of my very best, I think.
Or experiences. It could be anything, like anything that you may have done with people car-wise, or anything that you remember pertaining to automotive.
That's a good question. I would say that because most of my first 10 to 12 years was working with my dad on the 1929 Model A's, they're not a very exciting car, and they're not a very fast car. And I can recall good memories being maybe my dad and I, just the two of us, father, son, going to a car show, and we'd be cruising along at max speed of 45, 50 miles an hour, and people would go by and point and look at us like, wow, look at that. That's really cool, that old car. And then after a while, we just reversed it on them, and we would point at the regular everyday car and go, wow, look, there's a 75 whatever. And I'd like, so we would have fun doing that kind of thing. We got a lot of laughs out of that. But there was a car show, I forget what town it was in. I remember we stayed overnight in a hotel because it was a little bit farther than normal. And my dad knew that I had been patiently dealing with these older, slower cars, and I might have been about 9. And he asked this guy who was driving, I think it might have been a Chevelle. I think it was. It was like a 67 Chevelle, and it had a 396 big block. And he said, would you take my son for a ride? I want him to experience what a muscle car is all about. And I'd always been in these slower cars, of course. And this guy took me down the street and came back a couple miles, and he was on that throttle and jamming the gears. And I remember being thrown back into the seat thinking, wow, the roar and the V8 and all of that is probably one of the first times that I was intoxicated with the whole idea of I love muscle cars.
And you were able to feel it as opposed to just seeing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one thing to see these kind of cars leaving a parking lot and peeling out and that type of thing, but for the first time to actually experience it, I was like a kid on a roller coaster.
Okay, so this question sent in by one of the listeners says, name 3 people, local or famous, that come to mind immediately when you say the word cars.
Well, not just because he's my father and because he's part of this particular show, but a big appreciation to my dad, Rick, because he has always encouraged my love of cars. He understands it's a bit of a sickness. Anyone that's really into vehicles knows that. Sometimes it goes beyond logic. There's a passion for it, and you just almost get obsessive about pursuing that part or that vehicle or whatever it might be, and I immediately think of him. Secondly, I would have to think of kind of a two-part. My number 2 would be a two-part answer. I never met Chip Miller, but I'm very, very much in awe and respect of his son Lance Miller, and wish I had known Chip. But what they've been able to do, along with Bill Miller 2 and Bill Miller 3, with the whole Carlisle event, certainly being able to bring everyone and everything together, and building something really out of nothing from the mid 70s to where we see it today. So people from all walks of life, from all over the world, coming to here in Carlisle because of wheeled objects, because of cars, trucks, etc. That to me would be my second answer. Number 3, I would have to say, I know this sounds kind of hokey, but thanks to Henry Ford, quite honestly, without the what he was able to bring in the way of mass production, I think it completely revolutionized the way that automobiles became available to everyone, and it has become just a mainstay of our life, all of our lives, not just American lives, but all over the world. And I just read something recently where he approached his engineers and said he wanted to have a V8 cast out of a single block of iron, and the engineers kept saying it can't be done. He can't have it cast out of a single piece, and he was patient and just said, keep trying. 6 months went by. Chief engineer said, we've been trying, we just don't think we can continue on. And a year later, I think 14 months, 18 months, whatever it took, he finally said, just keep trying. And they finally did figure it out. So it's that type of that patience and perseverance that I respect and admire, and certainly you cannot think of automobiles without Henry Ford. regardless even if you're not a Ford fan.
Okay, next question would be, okay, this one's one of mine. I know what your all-time favorite movie is because you can repeat every word.
Sure.
But what would be a couple of your other favorite car movies and why?
Well, if you go old school, Smoking the Bandit, Cannonball Run, Gumball Rally, Bullet. We're never really into the whole plot of the movie, but boy, that car chase scene, everybody knows about it and can relate to it. But there's been some really great ones of late. Certainly, you have the Fast and Furious, and but some others that maybe don't get quite the press would be Rush with Niki Lauda, and that is such a great movie about the Formula One world. And I don't know how many people have heard of it, seen it, or watched it, but to me, one that is a bit of a dark horse is it's a Kevin Spacey movie that has it's called Baby Driver.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Yeah, and I even went out and bought the soundtrack to it and everything. But one of the opening scenes is the wheelman, this young kid, and he's behind the wheel of a boosted. I think they stole it. It was a Subaru WRX, and at the end of a this bank heist, they all get in the vehicle, and it's the getaway car, and
it's great. The music
is great. It's a really cool movie, and even if you don't like cars, which if you're listening to this podcast, that's not probably the case, but for even someone in your life that's not a car fan, it's amazing. It's a great movie. So Baby Driver, that's my recommendation for our current movie.
You're good. Okay, so there's two more questions. One of mine and one that someone else had sent in here. The one that was sent in was name, if you've had it, an experience that was scary or near death for you that gave you a true healthy appreciation for the strength of automobiles.
Well, it would be junior of high school. I won't say his last name, but high school friend, fellow football player Eric W. And we were in his 6.6 liter Trans Am. We were in Shippensburg scouting out the Greyhounds for the following weekend when we were going to be playing them. We came to the last light in town heading, I guess, east, going back towards Newville. And there was one other friend in the back seat, and I was up in the shotgun seat. And he said, when this light turns green, he said, I'm just going to mash it and stay on the throttle as long as possible. Well, on a 2-lane road at 125 miles an hour, I remember screaming to the point I was going hoarse, telling him, all right, I've had enough, slow this down. That was one of those really not so smart teenage moments.
You were lucky.
And I realized, in hindsight, especially that night, later when it was all said and done, the adrenaline rush was over, but we were fortunate, yeah, and definitely not encouraged, not condoned, and kind of scary to have thought that anything could have happened. Animal, a deer, a car pulling out from a side road, it would have been horrific. So nothing fun about that.
All right, so the last question is then, what are 3 to 5 things, or just a few things that you want the listeners to know about you, not necessarily even pertaining to cars or automotive, and actually probably preferably not, just something personal about you?
Okay, well, very much active guy. Never sit still. In fact, working on this podcast is a bit of a part-time, full-time type of job, and Scott and others that are involved with Cars of Carlisle are aware of that. Currently, we're all working full-time jobs and do this. There's work to be done most evenings and every single weekend as far as finding interviews and traveling to shows and locations and be sure to try and bring great content to all of you and to things that are interesting. I always try to think of it as what is interesting that you may want to hear and to take your ideas and suggestions and pursue those. So being on the move, always active. Been an athlete all my life. Love to do all kinds of crazy things. Ice hiking and paragliding and you name it. Jet skiing and scuba diving and skiing, downhill skiing, Nordic skiing, surfing. Yeah, so longboarding, you name it, always constantly on the move, trying a new sport and new activity and challenging myself. And certainly love people, love being a people person. I think that's somewhat evident through all the interviews and what have you. But I truly get a charge out of meeting new people, talking to them, learning their story, listening to them, understanding where they're coming from, different perspectives. That to me is incredibly important. Love to travel. It's been a real pleasure and an honor through my full-time job to be able to have visited places all over the world, including Brazil and Sweden, but to also make other travel to European and other countries on my own dime, and love to explore the new cultures, the new places, and all of that. So that to me is also very key. So I'd say that's 3 or 4 items, but that's a handful.
That's good. Well, that gives everybody a little idea, a little glimpse into your world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have any other questions or any comments, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Email us. Go onto the website, carsofcarlisle.com. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Facebook. Follow us wherever you can, Twitter, and reach out to us. We want to hear from you, and we want to hear about you as well.
Absolutely. That's been said throughout the entire 42 plus episodes, is that this is truly your podcast, and we at Cars of Carlisle are a team of people that work very hard to bring you great content and to hear your perspectives. We want to celebrate your love of cars and your vehicles and what have you. So continue to reach out to us. We thank you for connecting with us. A big thank you to Scott for hosting this week. Yes, wasn't so keen on this whole idea, but glad he jumped in the driver's seat on this particular one.
And jumping in one more time too.
Yeah.
I'll give the shout out this week to your wonderful sponsor, Man Engineering, out of Santa Clara, California.
Yes, Gary Lou and team.
Check them out. Check out the website. Contact them. Be in touch with them for anything Subaru performance.
Yep, www.man-engineering.com. All right, well, Scott, since you've been behind the wheel all night, I'll let you go ahead and wrap it up.
So this is where we say, drive well, be well, and take care.
Nice job.
Hey, thanks. See you next week.